Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, How Library Publisher Partnerships Can Support the SDGs, which is sponsored by Taylor and Francis Group. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Now I'll just put a couple links in the chat for where you can register for upcoming webinars and watch previous webinar recordings. So before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speakers or to share any comments. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions you like or would like to be addressed. Also, there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version and where to access the slides. And with that, are you ready to get started? So I will hand it over to Emily.
Hi, welcome to today's webinar. For a brief introduction, I'm Emily McElroy, a librarian of 25 years who moved to Taylor and Francis almost 5 months ago as Vice President of Academic Relations. Previously, I worked either in collections or library administration with 9 years as Dean of the Library at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And I'll let Robin and Jamie introduce themselves as we move through today's webinar. So why this topic of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, otherwise known as SDGs, and this particular group? Well, when I transitioned to my position at Taylor and Francis this spring, I started sharing with my new colleagues the lack of awareness of the SDGs in the US, which led to conversations about how we could make an effort to describe what they are, initiatives behind them, how libraries can support them, and institutions, and how publishers can work towards SDGs in their work on partnering with libraries. And we looked for a great library partner who's been working in this space for many years, and that is how Robin decided to join us. So she'll provide perspective of a librarian working in this space, while Jamie will reflect on the role of publishers. Whoops. My perspective is coming at this a little bit from my work with campus leadership, either as a dean or in other positions. And I spent a lot of time demonstrating the library's value, including ensuring our strategic plans aligned with universities. For example, when I worked at University of Nebraska Medical Center, the university's desire to change the world was part of its mission. And I thought carefully about how the library could support that mission, or even at the local level in Nebraska. And while the awareness of SDGs may be lacking, I believe most institutions and those working in them care deeply about what they represent. So what are they? Well, I want to back up first and discuss earlier efforts that Jamie was kind enough to explain to me when we first started talking about this. And that's in 1987, the UN defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And then in 2000, the UN created the Millennium Declaration with 8 goals that they wanted to accomplish by 2015. And then in 2015, the UN presented these 17 goals that are on the slide deck. And it was to promote prosperity while protecting the planet. And it would cover the years 2015 through 2030. And if we look at many university strategic plans, we would undoubtedly see efforts around health, education, equity, economic development, and so on, even if they aren't spelled out as an SDG. And universities are perfectly positioned to make a difference because of the interdisciplinary nature of their faculty, their role in serving their local and state communities, and many of them believe strongly in contributing to in the global environment. The UN, especially the UN Foundation, offers dashboards on their website, providing updates on our progress for each goal's benchmarks, which the US helped to create in 2015. So I'm going to kind of stick with this theme of goal number 3, good health and well-being. And as the Brookings Institution and other groups have noted, the COVID pandemic and political forces have slowed efforts to stay on track to actually achieve a single SDG by 2030. And the UN Foundation said that only 15% of the indicators are on track. But there is an upward trend for 10 to 17 goals. So maybe we can have some optimism there. So who's working on these goals? While the UN and national governments are taking the lead, state and local governments are involved in projects in the United States, foundations, nonprofits, corporations, and then of course, universities are also significant contributors. So I want to provide some examples of how a chancellor, a provost, or head of research considers reputation and the metrics they use, and how SDGs are starting to become part of those metrics. In many of my roles, it wasn't uncommon for the libraries to be consulted on some of the metrics that they use beyond the publication impact that many of us are familiar with. So one area of interest that kept coming up in my last several positions is from administrators, is how many faculty are members of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, or are selected as fellows of the AAAS. And the National Academies and AAAS are all involved in working on the SDGs. And this is just one slide showing some consensus study reports related to the goal of good health and well-being. And you may want to see who's involved in these efforts. So for example, I took one of these reports. Unfortunately, it's not one that's visible, but I looked at who from which universities were involved. And one of the reports showed people from faculty from University of California campuses of Davis and San Diego, Texas, Emory, Johns Hopkins, Illinois Institute of Technology, and University of Colorado. And the faculty crossed various disciplines from engineering and chemistry to nursing and public health. And when you think about this, everyone wants to demonstrate how someone's research influences public policy. So administrators care about that, but also individual faculty as they work on their tenure and promotion packets or apply for grants showing the impact of their research. And so this is just another reason to pay attention to who from your institution is contributing to the policy work on the SDGs, and going through the National Academies site is one easy way of doing that. Corporations also measure progress towards the SDGs, such as Johnson & Johnson's support for 11 goals. And while they obviously would be involved in global health equity, they're also engaged in things such as environmental and workforce goals. So again, keeping with the theme of good health, they outlined on their website plans that they have for this coming year around treatment for various diseases and healthcare for women. And a key statement for them in global health equity is targeting under-resourced communities and health systems, which could match either where the university is located or complement work that you know is happening in your university. As a New Jersey-based corporation, they outline a lot of work supporting community healthcare, creating fellowships with University of Pennsylvania on nursing fellowships, and supported scholarships for participation in Chief Nursing Officer Institutes. Another metric that a lot of administrators care about is, and that they work that they care very deeply about is building public and private partnerships. So this is another example of taking something like Johnson and Johnson and seeing if anyone from your university is working with a corporation related to an SDG, such as Johnson and Johnson's goal of new treatments for treating tuberculosis in the coming year. Rankings. We either love them or hate them. And starting in 2019, the Times Higher Education began ranking institutions for overall SDG contributions and then per goal. And as these rankings depend on institutions supplying data to them, I wouldn't view this as comprehensive rankings, but they do show who's actively involved in particular SDGs. In my role at one institution, I was asked a lot about the Times Higher Ed rankings and to explain its methodology and how we could increase our ranking. And so reflecting on my role at academic health science libraries, I'm sure many of those institutions are impacting the goal of health and well-being, or at least you hope they are. And should this be part of the higher ed rankings that our administrators consider and may want to provide data? So for health and well-being, the University of Buffalo is ranked 38 globally. So I went and I thought, okay, what are they doing to receive that type of ranking? And I looked at their website, and it's featured prominently that they have a major initiative around building a community health equity research institute, along with efforts around vaccinations and courses around sustainability and health. Another thing that I think is interesting, as universities compete for international students, there was a Times Higher Ed survey of prospective international students that you might want to throw out sometime when you're talking to someone from admissions or a provost about competing for students. And that is that 79% of these prospective students believe that universities have an important role to play in achieving the SDGs, with 9% saying sustainability was the most important factor in determining their university choice. So certainly something to pay attention to. There are many examples of US universities incorporating SDGs into their strategic plans or supporting critical units, such as their offices of global studies. The UN Foundation has a page called American Leadership on the SDGs, with a wealth of information that universities can use, or even if you want to look and see what others are doing. The University of California at Davis, Georgia Tech, the university systems of Illinois, Minnesota, Columbia, Villanova. I mean, there are many others that are really leading these efforts. And I want to call out to, in particular, UC Davis has a website showing all of their work. And like others, they've done a voluntary audit of their work around SDGs. So if you want to see what that voluntary audit looks like and the types of activities involved, I think that's a really great place to look. And by the way, we'll have plenty of resources available in afterwards that with all the links to these things. Georgia Tech is another institution that used a concept called 17 rooms, which the Brookings Institution and the Rockefeller Foundation developed. And it's 17 small groups with each one focused on an SDG goal. And they identify specific actions over a 1 to 2 year time period. And what I found really inspiring about the Georgia Tech work is that they really involved undergrad and grad students in this process. And I thought, how cool is that to be an undergrad student and to be exposed to all of the work around the sustainability goals, but then also how to see that plays into Georgia Tech's strategic plans that future generations will benefit from. And this year, Georgia Tech also added SDG Awareness Week with a sustainability showcase. So as university presidents and campus leaders embrace and incorporate SDGs in their strategic plans, their importance will naturally flow to libraries and what you develop. So with that, I will hand it over to Robin.
Thank you so much, Emily, for that larger framing of the SDGs in the academic environment. Hi, everyone. Please go ahead and fill in the poll there. Thank you so much for joining us today, whether you are here now live and in person, or if you are viewing the recording later. I'm so glad to be here today. I just want to say thank you to ACRL and to Choice, our organizers, and to my co-presenters, Emily and Jamie, for our discussions and for inviting me to join this webinar. So while you fill in the poll, I'm Robin Kear. I'm an academic librarian. I've been at the University of Pittsburgh here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for almost 17 years. I have worked at other academic institutions, and I've worked internationally as well. And so I have a long interest in the international work of libraries. Sabrina, are we ready for, there we go. Okay, good. So thank you for taking a moment to fill that in. Are the SDGs or sustainability language used in strategic planning at your library? And it looks like really split here. So this is great for some of the things I'm going to talk about. So yes, please share later if you have any suggestions during our Q&A session for how to further sustainability and strategic planning. And no, and I don't know. I hope that you learned some thoughts on strategy from all three of us today. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And I'm going to go ahead and move to my first slide. So my talk today will focus on sustainability and the SDGs in academic libraries and how we should think about that broad definition for how our lives are sustainable and how academic libraries can work with publishers to help achieve the goals more broadly. Now, when I think about the global goals, the 2030 goals put forward by the UN and the global call to action to end poverty and protect our planet and work towards prosperity, I think about how libraries do this work on a continual basis, how we sort of do many aspects of this work every day. And publishers are our partners in curating and making that information accessible to our users. And we don't always connect our local work to the global goals, and we don't always think about the partnership with publishers in furtherance of a societal goal. And I hope that we can all give you some ideas for how to think about this today, especially for those in academic libraries. And even if you aren't in an academic library, I hope some of this is translatable for your environment. So as Emily mentioned, I think libraries are key partners in this global work. And as universities think about this strategically, the libraries will need to as well to align with those goals. And I believe that achieving the goals really depends on information and libraries, and IFLA, the larger organization for library associations, has been actively involved in the promotion and creation of the SDGs related to information in libraries. And they advocated for inclusion of access to information, safeguarding cultural heritage, universal literacy, and more in the development of the framework, and they continue to be involved. But to get more to academic libraries, we are at the heart, the physical heart of campus and the heart of the student experience. And as Emily mentioned, the rare opportunity for intersection of the disciplines sometimes on our campuses. And I think that there are 4 different ways that libraries can work to achieve that, to advance sustainability, help achieve the goals. And that is by providing access to research and data, tying our library's strategic agenda to sustainability, and tying that work to advocacy, campus outreach, and community outreach. And I also want to highlight an emerging area, the ethical use of AI, as an example of that strategic thinking strategically. So for the first part, access to research and data, I just want to reiterate that open access advancement is key. The information and curation is key. And libraries are doing much of this work around open access, advocating for gold and green for our research materials, promoting our institutional repositories, providing access to preprints and draft versions, and having scholarly communications librarians is evidence of this work, and also working on open educational resources for curriculum, right? Having an open education librarian, as we do here at the University of Pittsburgh, is also evidence of working towards making curriculum materials open. And then also the open research movement with our federal government. If you remember the August 2022 policy update from the White House, that subtitle, sort of colloquial known as the Nelson Memo, went out, and the end of 2024 is the deadline for agencies to publish final public access policies. And this is really important for universities because we often are the recipients of the monies from those federal grants and those agencies that are going to be requiring sort of public access to the underlying data and public access of publications when funding by those agencies is used. And so libraries are really thinking about how to provide this for their campuses in collaboration with research offices at their institutions, and thinking about what immediately on publication means from the Nelson Memo. So this is important for the library to consider, and also to work through some of those federally mandated questions with publisher agreements. So publisher agreements are something that many libraries are negotiating with publishers, transformative agreements to make research more open. I think that these are beneficial for making scholarship open, more scholarship open, while acknowledging the cost that is associated with publishing, right? So it's a way for libraries and publishers to work together on making information and research information more accessible, especially. So thinking about this in terms of the strategic agenda, thinking holistically to achieve a better community. So this means thinking across the larger organization goals. As Emily was mentioning, many universities are thinking about that, and tying that, the library needs to think about tying this to our own goals and incorporating sustainability there. So I think that when we think about sustainability, there are different goals that we can think about related to one area, teaching and research. So thinking about community engaged scholarship and diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarship and service work is very important here at my university in our tenure and promotion requirements. So in my role as president of our university senate, we worked with our provost office, and we worked with others to develop guidance and to help have these implemented in our faculty's tenure and promotion processes. So I think that this kind of work, community engaged scholarship especially, is very important to achieving some of the goals in the SDGs, as I feel that they tie very closely. And it relates to societal impact in performance reviews for faculty. We can also think about these goals in teaching and research more broadly about curriculum integration, thinking about mainstreaming education on SDGs, using them in teaching and research, teaching about research concepts, supporting faculty that are exploring this in classes, and involving students in thinking about the SDGs during class time. And of course, library materials, what we do best are our core, selecting and curating materials that support the SDGs in education, thinking about how to find that information with the help of publishers, which gets to my last point here, vendors and publishers. So thinking about ways to work towards making that research more visible both for some of those rankings that Emily mentioned. How do you know what your university is doing in each area? That's a way, there are ways to compile that kind of information, and libraries can think about that with publishers. But also I want to mention, and I know Jamie will also mention this, is the SDG Publishers Compact, which is the publisher groups committing to the SDGs, actively promoting and inquiring content that advocates for those themes, annual reporting, and so on. And working with these vendors who sign this Publishers Compact is an important consideration for libraries to take into account if their strategic goals are around sustainability and SDGs more broadly. So knowing who's in the Publishers Compact is important. And they also have a Fellows program, which has been active and offers tips. And those are librarians and others in the publishing world thinking about how to make them more visible. One thing for academic libraries, again, aligning with the strategic agenda, is thinking about advocacy and campus outreach. I mentioned research offices, but we also have sustainability offices at our universities. And they're the ones who are often responsible for those statistics that administrators are using, and how can libraries support those offices and be a partner in thinking about the impacts of the research in the SDG areas. So it's really just a sort of reframing for sustainability offices about the kind of research and productivity that your universities are already doing. And I think there's a role for the library to assist there. And then working on research, individual librarians working with research centers and committees and interdisciplinary committees on campus, I think is so important as well, to sort of showcase that the library is thinking about the interdisciplinarity and why the research outcomes are important. Another way for libraries to engage in this strategically is community engaged scholarship. I mentioned that as a priority for our faculty to be able to be rewarded for that through the promotion and tenure process. And I want to talk a little bit about a case study that I have there, which was a report that came out from our University School of Social Work. And it came out in 2019, and it was about our city. And it was titled there, Pittsburgh's Inequality Across Gender and Race. And there were so many researchers here that contributed to that report, and working on the data, new data, and also compiling existing data on how to look at that for the city. And it really had a really strong impact on our community leaders, on our city leaders, and even here at in our medical school at the University of Pittsburgh. This report did. So it had had public policy outcomes. It had people thinking in the community about why some of these inequalities exist and how to alleviate them. And that came about through that community partnership work. And it's led to changes in our medical school curriculum. And it had a lot of news coverage locally. And that's the kind of partnership work that I think can energize the community, but it also relates to the goals. You know, as Emily mentioned, number 3, well-being, goal 3, but it all, you know, can also relate to other goals as well, and just tying those together. The community partnerships there, and publishing opportunities. How do we ensure continued access to these publications and works? There could be different kinds of publishing opportunities available for community engaged scholarship that, you know, I don't foresee right now. But I think thinking about that is important. And to close, I just have 2 more slides on thinking about artificial intelligence, literacy, the SDGs, and the role for libraries. And the work around this that is already going on in many of our universities. So libraries, I think, have a unique opportunity and responsibility to be the equalizer for students in an academic environment for generative AI and other AI assistants, and learning what they are and how to use them, and thinking about general AI literacy programs and implementing this technology in our databases, in our general scholarship services, and evaluating those and offering those kinds of vendor tools and educating our users on how to use them, I think is so important and will be. And it's also about connecting researchers, which is our specialty, having sort of efforts that library programming to facilitate that interdisciplinary work around AI, and thinking about sharing that research. So again, going back to that open access, things that are critical to sustainable development goal advancement, and the continuations of those transformative agreements. I did some work last fall to speak to this last bullet point about publishers and AI authorship, and sort of a landscape review of how publishers were thinking about that. And it really examined what guidance was available to authors around AI when they're publishing journal articles, research articles, really. And basically, AI is not an author. It cannot be responsible and be an author, and any use of it must be disclosed. But I think that it's really important for research offices and also libraries to talk to publishers about how AI is affecting them, and how it's going to be generally affecting scholarship in the future. And so I think this is an interesting sort of case study for thinking about ethical use of AI, and as it relates to sustainability, and how that might relate to a library's strategic goals. Because a sustainability framework, I think, can assist with this new kind of challenge. Is this development of AI and what we're using with our students or our publishing or making our research available, is that consistent with, academic and scientific values? Is it avoiding harm, seeking to avoid harm of various kinds of misinformation, reputational harm, etc.? Are we minimizing the environmental costs? Are we selecting tools and working with publishers to think about the costs, the energy costs of AI, and how we're responsible for offsetting those environmental costs? And the one link that I have here is students and our learners are increasingly aware of and concerned about that equity, bias, and accessibility related to AI and to the climate costs. So not only does something like this work in a sustainability strategic framework for libraries, but it's also very important to our users. So to close here, I just want to leave you with hope, right? So what can you do, and what can you do in your libraries? I hope that you can see that we can do so much when we think about sustainability broadly and tie it to strategy, and think about ways to partner with publishers, and the small steps like that. These steps make the larger goals possible. And libraries play a big part in helping to provide that knowledge, understanding, and resources for our communities. And when we are providing that information at the local level, providing resources, skills, and tangible ways to achieve the goals, that's what we can do to connect with what we already do with the global goals. So I thank you for your attention, and we're going to move into Jamie next. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I think we're just going to move on to our next poll. And just a question here really that struck us as we were putting together this presentation. Just wondered how many people who have pre-registered, who are joining us today, have actually spoken to a publisher about the SDGs, or more generally about sustainability. So my name is Jamie Hutchins. I'm the Director for Open Research in the Americas. I've been working in the publishing industry now for 25 years. And when I think back on it, as Emily talked about at the beginning, the SDGs, or some variant or some predecessor of the SDGs, have been part of my role for almost that entire time. And so it was an inspiring conversation that we had when we first started working together earlier this year. So I think we've got let's see what the results from the poll are. So this is pretty much what we anticipated. And my role has gone through a bit of a change in the last year working with Taylor and Francis, where I work much more closely with librarians, developing partnerships, working around open research, working around some of the transformational agreements that Robin also mentioned. And in almost none of those conversations have we spoken about broader partnerships, the SDGs, or other ways that we can work together, or actually the similarities in what we aim to achieve as organizations between a publishing house and a library as well. So that was the point for this today. When I first started talking to Emily, and then later with Robin, we met at ALA this year just to discuss what we might talk about today. She pointed me to this map from IFLA. And this is where library organizations are sharing stories about their activities relating to the SDGs. And to the point that one of our participants made, this can be a library of any size, a college, community college, high school library, any size. We're focused only, we've taken a few examples, I think, from some of the larger organizations that we've worked with. But again, this is issues that can work at a local, regional, national, and international level. All of those things are important. It's the collection of those activities that adds up to progress towards solving some of the great challenges that we have as a global society. The reason I pointed to this map is because I moved to the US about 8 years ago from the UK. And in this map, we have 0 stories from the US. And I find it really hard to believe after conversation with Robin, with Emily, that we have 0 stories across the library community in the US. And that feels like a good challenge, the right kind of challenge to base some partnerships off of. So my ambition, at least, is when we repeat this webinar, perhaps in a year's time, that we start to see stories flagging up there in the US. Obviously, other countries as well. We're doing our global work as an organization, but for me, focused in or living in the US, I'd love to see that this is something that we could work on together. Now, Emily mentioned the Millennium Goals. So 25 years, I started in publishing just before the millennium. About a year into my work, I was working on an AIDS journal, and that was one of the Millennium Goals was solving AIDS at that time. One of the issues we faced actually there was getting good quality publications and research to government officials and to policymakers. And I think that's something we can see there's been great progress towards in those years. But we didn't solve the Millennium Goals. And by 2015, it became very clear that we weren't even close. So they were reformatted and pulled together into the current state of the SDGs. At that time in 2015, I think I had made 3 or possibly 4 different attempts to launch publishing programs focused on global goals, whether they were the Millennium titles or the SDGs. And typically what I received as a response was, that's not my discipline. And of course, no single discipline is going to solve any of these massive issues. And the point here really is, it's the combination of different disciplines bringing their expertise and skills, efforts and energy together to actually solve issues that affect the whole world. I'm glad to say that attitude is now gone, and there's been a real sort of change. I really started to see some differences in the UK and Europe, especially around 2012, as I started to work with a physics publisher at that time. And we could really start to see how we as a physics publisher could expand the remit of what we hope to achieve in the world, and then who we could work with to achieve more. So we were looking to really create positive impact. And as a publisher, I think maybe it's not obvious that there are different ways that we can achieve that. So quite often it's a running joke that all problems for publishers look a bit like a journal or a bit like a book, or the solutions do. And of course, publishing is really what we do. There's a lot behind how we support the research community in their publishing efforts, and then how we disseminate that, interpret some of those results, and get those to policymakers, to readers and other researchers, and to the public. As a larger body at Taylor and Francis, we also have a corporate action that we can take. So as a publishing house, Taylor and Francis, but also as a member of the larger Informa group, and we have corporate actions that we can take. And I don't think that's something that we really make the best use of. And I don't think our library partners necessarily are aware of all of those actions. So I'd like to show you a few of those today as well. And then as a publishing industry, Robin already mentioned the Publishers Compact. This is something that as an industry we have decided to take action on. So again, I don't know how aware everyone is of that, so I wanted to highlight some of those and use this as maybe inspiration for thinking about how we could work with the library and publishing community more in the future. So let's focus on publishing to start with. So this is a core of what we do. As an organization, Taylor and Francis has created our sustainability hub, and this is where we try to bring together all of our activities that are relating to the SDGs and to sustainability more directly or more generally. And I think when we're in the current climate in the US, I know for some, anything linked to the United Nations can be something that you perhaps don't want to use to flag when you're talking perhaps to your administration. And similarly, when we're talking to different disciplines, we might want to be talking about sustainability rather than particular SDGs. So we can be very flexible in the way we approach this. With our sustainability hub, the starting point for us is really, as you have mentioned already, the publications that we create. So this is usually the articles within journals, the journals themselves, collections of those articles, the books and book series that we can develop that can directly support the SDGs or other related areas. Our communications team as well, which we're fortunate enough to have a communications team, spend a lot of time engaging directly with authors and trying to promote their content and taking the research out of the research article and putting it into a format that's more accessible. So what I show on the top left there is interpretations of research articles, interviews with authors. It's things to make the research a bit more dynamic, something that might appeal to the public, something that can appeal to a policymaker. On the right-hand side, we're showing some highlighted books. So again, we like to dig a bit deeper with our authors. And if they have books that are relevant to the SDGs, we spend time with those authors and really try to get to the bottom of what it was they were trying to achieve by writing that book, who they were targeting, and then thinking about how we as a global body can help them to target those audiences in different ways. So we feature books and authors, we do regular updates, we use our corporate vehicles, whether that's in social media, online, or in print, as ways to help get that research, the valuable research, interpreted and also into the hands of people who need it. And then collections. So this can take lots of different forms. So one of the platforms that we work with is called F1000 Research. This is an open research platform. It is essentially a preprint server with validation through editorial checks, open peer review, and then open publication. So its aim is to cover the entire research life cycle. So from the conception of a research project through to its publication, also to allow authors to provide updates during their research process. But we have a specific climate change gateway or climate action gateway, which is directly supporting the SDGs. And what's interesting there is because we have multiple formats, we can actually start to look at things like the causes of climate change, their impacts, and potentially to explore different solutions, things that perhaps wouldn't be covered necessarily in a more legacy journal format. At the top of our tree, if you like, of content is the SDG Online. And this is, again, a portal that has a large number of different content types available within it, all freely available. And they're focused, there are 17 SDGs and there are 17 collections. And depending on how we collate things together, there are really significant amounts of material here that are available for the library community or for any other user to make use of. And as an example, goal 1, to end poverty. We have over 1,300 chapters, nearly 200 articles, and 12 teaching tools that are available on that particular goal. And it's similar for each of the other 17. I took a look at one of my favorite areas, something I'm very concerned about myself, is goal 14, which is life below water. It's an area I've published in before. It's an area that, again, is a personal concern. And here we have over 1,500 chapters, more like 150 articles and 20 teaching tools available there. So that's one way we aim to partner with the library community. Perhaps more obviously this year, in the last 12 months, we launched a collective or collaborative funding initiative called Pledge to Open. And the intention of this particular program was to establish an open access books program supported by the library community that would make 70 books open access, each of them inspired or in collections inspired by the SDGs. We just closed that first pledging round about a month ago. I'm really pleased to say that we had 24 supporters across an international audience, many of them from the US. And we were able to make 26 books open access as a result of that first pilot. We'll be going on to do more in that particular area, but that's a really obvious way that we can work with the library community as well. As a corporation, as a corporate body, we have built the SDGs into our corporate dynamics. We're absolutely committed to sustainability. Informa, who is the owner of TNF, is a publicly traded body. It's something that's quite often not considered, but our annual reports also report on the ways that we have committed to supporting the SDGs. They have statements of commitment, and towards the right-hand side here, I've highlighted it's 8 of our main commitments around different parts of the Informa business. And it's something, again, brought together and made very dynamic for all of our staff of over 5,000 people under a banner of Faster Forward. So trying to move as fast as we can as a company in a sustainable manner to try and affect some real change. We have sustainability targets to reach net zero by 2030 as an organization. So that's across all of the Informa businesses. We're also committed to promoting the SDGs, to targeting community and global benefits around the world. And we have similar targets around things like a contribution to the host cities in which we host our offices. And then at the top of the tier there is we're also dedicating 1% of our profits pre-tax to community groups. So we're having direct impact through our ability as a corporation. And then one step above, again, Informa, TNF, involved in many industry initiatives. And I've put 3 in front here: the Book Chain Project, Publishing Declares, and the SDG Publishers Compact. Now, there have been a number of efforts in different parts of the publishing industry to try and coalesce action and to make change. And these have all taken steps and been informed by each other. And really, the SDG Publishers Compact is where we're really focused now as an organization. And just to show you a little bit of the SDG Publishers Compact, there are 10 main goals within the compact itself. And to become a listed member of the SDG Compact, you have to commit to all of these 10 goals and these action points. You have to integrate them into your business strategy. We have to set targets, and then we have to actually set the indicators to show that we're achieving those targets and then report upon them. So this is about being very transparent as organizations, not just saying you want to do something, but actually committing resources to doing it and then reporting against them. So the first thing, committing as an organization, promoting and publishing content, annually reporting your progress against the targets. And this can be a publisher of any size. Obviously, as a larger publisher, we expect to try and do more than our share. We must have a nominated and dedicated person. So that's a really major step we took a couple of years ago to actually have a sustainability officer within our organization to centralize and bring together all of our activities. You must be committed to raising staff awareness. And I doubt there's anybody in the TNF family who isn't aware of the SDGs and our activities towards this. It's something that really motivates all of us. Stepping beyond ourselves, we're also dedicated to working with our suppliers, making sure they understand the SDGs, their roles in achieving them. And the way that we select suppliers also integrates different aspects of making sure that they have sustainable practices as organizations too. And then we're committed to advocacy, working with our customers and stakeholders. And then collaborating locally, nationally, internationally, I talked about before. And perhaps more importantly, dedicating budget and resources to making sure that we actually do take actions. So some of the areas that we've worked on as an organization are really quite clear. Things like moving towards a print on demand basis. So not printing material that we haven't already sold, not shipping it to warehouses and allowing it to sit there, not taking those print to conferences and then returning them to a warehouse and making sure that they aren't destroyed unnecessarily. So that's one major step that we took. When I was in another publishing house, one of the major things we did was change the way that we printed, the way that we selected the paper that we printed on, and also the print itself, the ink, making sure that that was more sustainable and more ecologically sustainable. Similarly, we donate books, so books that are going out of print or books that have been returned. They're donated to different community projects. And then something that I wasn't aware of until very recently, we've moved in several steps towards removing all plastic wrapping for journals that are still sent in print. And there's a significant demand still for print journals. But we realized that even the biodegradable packaging that we were using was actually leaving plastic microbeads. So we've now investigated and implemented a new move forward where we have no plastic wrapping at all. So that's really like a whole group of things that we as an organization are doing. But the thing it still leaves for me is, as somebody who works almost daily with library community, it feels like there are a lot of opportunities for us to consider how we partner and ways that we could actually start to push forward on the SDGs together. I would wager that some of the reasons that my colleagues and I got into publishing are very similar to some of the reasons why people take library sciences and move into those communities as well. And I think there's a lot more that we could do together. There's a few ideas I've put here with Robin and with Emily. One thing that I've noticed sitting in science or STM-based industry meetings, an absence of librarians. And I would love to see some of our representative industry bodies come together purposefully behind the SDGs as well. So it's not just one industry, but two different communities coming together and perhaps different aspects of the roles that we can take, but perhaps also contributing to those stories that I talked about on the IFLA website. I put a few other things here. We work together quite often as library advisory boards. That's the way for you as librarians to contribute to our strategy. Robin also mentioned that the publishing agreements help us to also achieve these sustainability goals through especially open access publishing. We make a huge amount of training and resources available, and we're happy to share those with anybody who wants them. But I think also as a library community, you're creating a similar number of resources, and perhaps there's ways for us to think about as a community of interest coming together and sharing those resources. And then I would love to present at conferences, and I know Emily is available also and does this quite frequently. Robin, we've talked about this ourselves, finding ways for us to talk across our two different communities and think about how we can act together. And then bring it back to that first inspiration. Let's generate some stories together and let's see that map being filled in over the next 12 months. So thank you for your time, and we would love to move on to the Q&A now. I'm sorry, we went a little bit over here. Just to add as well, I know there were a couple of comments. We have got resources across all of this presentation available to you, and we can send those to anyone after this presentation. So thanks for your time.
Great, thanks Jamie, and thanks Emily and Robin. Like Jamie said, we have a few minutes to take some questions. It looks like we already have a few, but if you haven't submitted a question yet, feel free to do so, and you can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions you like or would like to be addressed. Okay, we had a question come in from Andrea, who asks, what do you think about the tendency in the US to look at the SDG topics, for example, health and well-being, generally, but not drill down to the actual specific targets and indicators, for example, maternal mortality? Is that problematic in your opinion, or is any attention good attention? And this came in, I think, during Jamie's presentation, but open to all.
I would say any attention is good attention, but I would obviously I'm kind of interested to know a little bit about what prompted your question, but I do think that if we look at the work that's happening in either universities, colleges, community colleges, which I do want to address, but also partnering with community organizations and health centers, I believe that there is a lot of work happening around maternal mortality. It's just not being connected directly to the SDGs. And that's an area where going back to our communities and saying, hey, do you realize that this is something that's really important, and going down, drilling down. But I think that there is that overall gap of knowing even about the SDGs with some of our communities. But again, yeah, I'll let if Robin and Jamie have other answers.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, because my portion did focus on sort of thinking about sustainability more generally as a strategic framework. But then, you know, it's those specific targets that are why we do what we do. And any group or library could pick out specific targets, right, to work on. To work through in their library, or whether with publishers or with whatever other campus groups they're doing. And I'll say that report that I did mention, and I saw that someone asked for it, so I will put that report link in the chat, that did get to maternal mortality as one of those inequality indicators in our city. And so that actually, there was a lot of attention paid to that when that report came out regionally here. And it did spur different public policy goals for the city around maternal mortality. And that is also a driver for our medical school and the training that they give to medical school students. So I'm saying all that to say that the larger community research did come down and affect some of the specific targets and indicators. So I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear, but I feel like that could be specific targets and indicators could be something that an organization focuses on.
This is a great question, isn't it? Actually, I think it's one of the things, the SDGs themselves, they're descriptive. But they're very complex. These are like systems-based issues that we have, and we need to tackle from multiple different dimensions. So I think it was Andrea who asked this question. I think this is really pivotal as well. You need to get into the real understanding of the topics themselves, and really think about how you can break those down into something that's achievable at whatever level you can work at. And I think all of these efforts are important. I think it's very easy to say, I can't do anything, but actually we can all do something. And I highlighted the SDG around life underwater. It turns out that from my colleagues' perspective, the best way that they could as an organization address that issue was to actually cease using plastic wrapping. I never would have thought of that as being a way to contribute to that particular issue. So there are many ways we can break these topics down, and should.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Looks like we're running out of time here, but I know there were several questions about resources, so I'll just note that everyone should have access to the slides after the webinar, which has an extensive list of resources. So I'll just note that. Yeah, I think we're about at time, so I'll just conclude and say thanks so much to Emily, Robin, and Jamie for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and your comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording and where to access the slides. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the webinar and hope to see you again in the near future on another session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.